So, hello, fellow Earthlings. This is Earthling 6455463728, and it is really impossible to compare the US to most other countries fairly. And I'll get into that in a moment. As usual, I am Earthling, yada yada yada. I have a couple of degrees, computer science and an MBA. I have lost almost 100 pounds from my heaviest and have kept it off, quit smoking. I have traveled a bit, Grand Canyon, Czech Republic, Tokyo, Japan, and I take care of my uncle who has dementia. So, as I was saying at the top, it's kind of impossible to really compare the US the way that we see it being compared to many other countries in the world. Like, people in many articles you will see there's something about what's going on in Germany or what's going on in one of those Nordic countries, how great their system of healthcare, of government, or whatever it might be. And of course there is a comparison with the richest, most powerful country in the world, and it's not really an effective comparison. One of the things that I was doing recently is I wanted to go from the top down in terms of the most populated countries in the world and go all the way down to, the smallest, the least populated country in the world, and just find out some stuff about a lot of these different countries. Just spend 5 minutes every day, maybe looking where they are on the map and such. And one of the things that you quickly realize, I don't know how quickly, because I'm at like 140 something, but one of the things that I realize is that there are a lot of countries that don't have that many people. There are a lot of countries that have like between 1 and 10 million people, for example. Doesn't mean that between 10 and 30 there are a lot of more other countries, but there are a lot of countries with less than 10 million people. A lot of African countries, a lot of Asian countries, just all over the place. And it really is unfair when you take you shake up a bag of all of these little countries, whether they're in Europe, whether they're in Africa, Asia, South America, wherever it is. You find one or two that you want to talk about because of a particular aspect of their country that you find to be really great. And then we say, well, as long as we're looking, let's compare it to the richest, most powerful country on the planet and see how that goes. And the US is going to end up not looking very good, because you have ignored all of these other countries where things kind of suck compared to this 1 or 2 countries or 3 countries even that you want to focus on a particular aspect of their government, their whatever it is. So if you grab all of these tiny little countries together and you say, okay, we're going to make a much bigger country out of it, you probably will get something that's probably a lot more comparable to the US in terms of the population and the size and how sucky these different measures that we use to compare the success of the US to are, when you even it out amongst all of these other countries that aren't doing as well in this particular parameter. So it really isn't, because the US itself is 50 different states, and Puerto Rico and Guam and the US Virgin Islands. The US is all of these different countries that are in many ways, each of many of these different states are a lot bigger than the other countries that you are, looking amongst to find these qualities that you want to compare to the entire US. It's not probably as interesting or useful but it makes more sense to compare US states against a particular parameter or something that you want to compare than it is to see like, okay, well, there's this one state that has, great budget. It has a great budget system. They have a lot of money saved up in case of any emergencies. Let's compare them to individual states in the US and see how that works. Of course, that's not how the US is really governed at a federal level, but still, it kind of makes a lot more sense because there are so many disparate ideologies that are ingrained in different parts of the US according to which state that you live in, or even what city that you're comparing it to. So if you see many of these stories about how underdeveloped the US might be in a particular aspect, even if you're comparing it to another developed nation. If you're comparing the US to another developed nation, that is still a bit unfair because these other developed countries are not still, for the most part, not anywhere comparable to the US in terms of size. So for example, the UK has like 60 million people, which I believe is somewhere on the order, it's about a fifth. It's about a fifth as many people as the US has. I think France has something like 70 million people, and Germany might have about 80, between 60 and 80. That's a fraction. It's a fraction of the 320 to 350 million people that are in the US. So if you did want to directly compare, you could probably find a Germany in the US and say, yeah, look, that's Germany there, or that's the UK, or that is France, and that part of the US is doing amazingly. Now, this other part of the US is like Bulgaria, or it's like Poland, or it's like Italy in terms of how well it manages this other stuff. Because maybe a better comparison, if you're comparing the US, is to compare it to the EU. And the EU has a lot of states that are not really very developed. And the US has a lot of states that are not really very developed for whatever reason. Just as an aside here, one of the big reasons that the a state might not be very developed is because they might not have a US base close by, because US military industrial complex really helps certain states. The only states that are of the same size as the US are places like China, places like India, places like Bangladesh. I think that Brazil has about 200 something million people. So there's no developed country that has as many people as the US on the same order. As a matter of fact, there's so many states that just are not anywhere. They might be doing well per capita, they might be doing well even with millions and millions of people, but it's just not on the scale of the US to be able to properly compare. Of course, when you also bring in the fact that the US is one of the, or if not the oldest democracy, there are many other democracies in the world, in the West, that would have been able to leapfrog the US in terms of not having old infrastructure to build on. When they actually became a democracy, or they actually became developed, they would have been able to take advantage of whatever technology was available at that time and not have to be backward compatible in many ways. So let's say, for example, if you look at a place like China in terms of building its infrastructure, it didn't have to deal with these huge automakers who had, entrenched interests in having a highway culture. So it just was able to build a lot of high-speed rail all across China, which helps China in an amazing way because they don't have to be backward compatible and think about where are we going to park these cars that people have. And I mean, China has a lot of cars still, but they're able to, and with respect to sewer systems that would have been built, they just did not have these big cities that were built at the time. So China is still, on a GDP per capita basis, not developed at all, but it's able to leapfrog in terms of technology and infrastructure and all these different things in a way that makes it kind of unfair, 50 years from now, to compare a China to the US in a real way. Also, of course, the US, geographically speaking, is completely different from all of these other countries that have so many different borders with so many other different countries. And of course, well, that's a benefit for the US. But by and large, it doesn't serve the purpose that it seems to serve when you see an article that says, well, the Nordic countries are doing great. Germany has this advanced thing, and UK and France and Romania has this amazing new thing. Yeah, it doesn't serve as much comparatively in order to, what is the word, like forward the conversation when, yeah, you have, like, I don't want to say 300 because there's not 300 countries in the world, but we have like maybe at least 60 something tiny countries with less than 10 million people, and they have achieved a particular milestone with respect to development. And then you say, well, the US can't achieve that. Yeah, the US can't because it has like 350 million people. And, it's like having a keyboard that's a particular way, and people say the Dvorak keyboard is supposed to be so much better. Yeah, well, there's already so many people who already know the existing QWERTY keyboard, and they're not going to change, no matter how good the Dvorak keyboard is supposed to be. And apparently it isn't that much better anyway. So anyway, that's it for me. That's my opinion. Feel free to chime in and like, dislike, share, comment, subscribe, any of that YouTube feedback stuff. Of course, keeping in mind that what would you like as feedback if this were your YouTube content? Feel free to subscribe, of course. Peace.